Hi, my name's Bill Mason from Mason & Mason. I'm a real estate attorney in New York. I've practiced in transactional real estate for about 25 years now, and this is real estate from an attorney's perspective. All right, so what I wanted to talk to you about today was buying a bank-owned property, commonly known as an REO. And so I'm going to start out with describing how the bank winds up with the property. In New York, sometimes banks, after they go through the judicial foreclosure process and the property goes to an auction, there is either not a high enough bid to justify the bank selling it, or nobody bids on the property, and the bank will wind up taking the property back, and it won't sell at auction, and it'll go into their inventory of properties they have to sell. Another way that a bank could wind up with a property to sell is sometimes the banks try to go around the whole judicial process, and they'll reach out to the borrower directly and maybe make a deal cash for keys, in which the bank will pay the borrower to sign the deed over to them. And these are two common ways that the bank can wind up with a property. So I can't tell you how many times I'll have a client come into the office and say, hey, I got great news. I was able to get a bank-owned property. And some of them in their head, I don't know if it's from watching, other like YouTubers and telling them about how to invest and that, they automatically think that it's a great deal. And usually the first thing I start with is, you have to understand that the bank is a professional seller, and they know exactly what that property's worth. Sometimes it could be a great deal, but more often than not, what I find is that they're buying the property at fair market value or close to fair market value. There's probably no bank that's not going to sell the property without getting what's called the BPO. It stands for broker price opinion. So when they're listing that property, they know what it's worth. So when you do get the property from the bank, unless it's just a property that you really want, for some reason it's in a location that you think that you want the property, or you're getting a good price, I think you shouldn't do it unless, there's really a motivating factor. And I'm going to go over some of the things that you're trading off by buying this property from a bank. Okay, so I made a kind of like a list here of all the things that are typically in these types of contracts when you get the contract from the bank to buy from them. Okay, so the things that I typically see in these contracts that I want to go over with you that I consider a trade-off for buying from the bank as opposed to a traditional seller are, to start with, first, the transfer tax. So the transfer tax, that's an expense that's typically paid by the seller, and it varies from county to county. It's much more expensive in the city of New York. They put that burden on the buyer in the contracts. So when you're buying one of these properties, you have to understand that that's a potential expense that they'll put onto you. I'm not saying that every one of these contracts does that, but it's common. I usually tell my clients that whatever this additional transfer tax is, add that to the price in your head and say, would you still have bid knowing that you had to add this extra $5,000 or $6,000 to the price? Okay, so the first issue is going to be transfer tax. The second issue, which is a very big issue, is the seller typically does not make any representations about violations or certificates of occupancy. So certificates of occupancy, for those of you that don't know what they are, they're basically the building department's approval of the structure. And you almost always have a certificate of occupancy for the house. It's very rarely that you run up against a property that doesn't have a seal for the house. Sometimes they predate, which is okay also, the requirements of COs. But what you run up against a lot is that people, after they've built the houses, they add an addition, they add a pool, they convert the garage to living space, or they do other improvements, and they don't get them legalized. So by buying one of these properties, you're taking the risk that you may later on have to legalize the property. I mean, that's the cost of the filing, the architectural plans, possibly modifying whatever structures were built to fall within the code, if they can be legalized, okay? And then just a quick point, because I had this on a property, is that we, in Long Island, had this Storm Sandy, and there's still the requirements for houses to be raised If they were substantially damaged in the storm, you could wind up buying a house, and then when you get the CO search back from the bank after you've gone to from the title company, after you've gone to contract, find out that, the town wants to come in and do an inspection and determine whether or not you have to raise the house. And that's a six-figure, proposition. So the CO issue is a big thing to give up. In most areas on Long Island, it takes weeks to get a CO search in, and the bank's not going to make you wait weeks to sign the contract. They're going to want you to sign right away. And so you just really got to know that that's a big thing you're giving up when you go to contract on these. And I would leave some thought to, I might have to spend some money on that when I decided to move ahead. They also don't give any representations about the condition of the house. And so you're really just truly buying the house in as-is condition. Some of the banks will let you do an inspection. Some of them won't. Some of them will have the house winterized, and they won't unwinterize the house. So you're taking the risk that the plumbing is working. You don't know. And so these are problems, okay? Also, if you're planning on getting financing, the banks will they'll allow you to get financing, and sometimes they'll allow for a mortgage contingency clause, especially, or only when it's presented with the offer. I had said in prior videos, the mortgage contingency clause, it's all about the verbiage in the contents of the paragraph, and so it's not the best verbiage for the terms under which you can get the money back. It's also not, the kind of thing where they give you a very long time to get the loan. You have to take into consideration that will the bank allow you to get a loan without the utilities working, or if there's missing appliances. So these are all things you got to think through with your lawyer before you sign the contract to make sure that you're going to be able to close and not lose your money, all right? And also the bank puts in the contract more often than not what's called the time of the essence closing. In New York, we generally have what's called on or about closings, where it's a target date and there's a lot of flexibility with regard to the closing date before anyone loses their money. Here, they want you to have almost always what's called the time of the essence date, and if you don't close on that particular date, as long as it's not through the fault of the seller, you lose the down payment. So that's another risk you really got to consider, especially since it's usually a short closing date. Sometimes they'll have a provision in there also that if they decide to give you an extension of the closing date, they want to charge you a penalty. It could be $100 a day or some other formula based on the price of the house to extend it. And that could add up really quickly. So you want to really keep those things in mind. And you'll see that as stringent as the contract is with you, and how they really hold you to everything you need to do and don't make any promises to you. On the flip side, they're going to have the wiggle room to delay the closing, to clear title issues. And a lot of the times it takes longer to clear a title issue with one of these banks than you would want, because they have tens of thousands of these files throughout the country. And it's just basically going through a clerk, and you're kind of stuck working at their speed, or if the files are in storage, or getting it from the foreclosing law firm, the information you need, or there could be a mistake on the foreclosure. So you just have to kind of go into it knowing that the closing could be delayed, and that could be a problem for the people that are, selling their house and buying, because if you have to sell on a certain date, and your house is not ready on the buy end, what are you going to do? So these are all things to think about before you rush into buying one of these properties. And also with these properties, although I've never personally had this happen to me, I almost always see that the contract has in there that it's subject to a third-party approval, which could be like a PMI company. They could basically squash the deal on you, and then you'd have to start over again. So there's a lot of trade-off here, and what I'm getting at is it could be a good deal, and you really got to do your homework and make sure that you understand what you're giving up by buying the property. You understand if it's a good price or not. It's not a good price just because it's an REO, and that you do have the time to delay the closing if you need to. So these are things I've come across, And if anyone has any questions, they can comment, and I'll try to get back to you on anything. And I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to my video. And if you have any other topics you'd like us to talk on, we would love to hear from you. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.